Okay, so I don't know how qualified I am to talk about this. Like, admittedly, I'm 22 years old, I'm still in college. I only have a partially completed women's studies minor. So I'm not claiming to be an expert, but definitely think I have something to contribute to the conversation. So if there's something that I say that you don't agree with, please, let's converse about it. That's okay, because I don't know everything about this topic. So I had never heard the word consent used in a romantic or sexual context until I was 20. Maybe I lived in a bubble, but didn't hear it till I was 20. I had been devouring podcasts and articles and movies, anything that could teach me about sexual assault and recovery. Because when I was 20, I was a Mormon missionary, but I was out preaching about Jesus in the heart of South America, and a man made a horrible decision to rape and kill my companion and I. Obviously, he's unsuccessful because I'm standing here, but even the attempted rape and attempted murder at knife point were enough to completely rock my world. I came home. People always ask me if I did, and I'm like, duh, I came home. Like, the person's just gonna be fine after that. Like, I came home. And that summer, I remember a moment I was making pizza with my aunt and talking about the assault and telling her my confusion. I was like, I just don't understand why that man would have wanted to rape me. I was a missionary, like, I didn't have running water. I was super greasy and stinky and in like 2 pairs of tights and like so many layers because it was so cold. Like, why on earth would he have wanted to rape me? And my aunt was blown away and she explained, Maddy, like, rape is not about sex. It's about power and control. And I think up until that point, I hadn't realized that. I really thought that sexual assault and rape were about sex and attraction. So that was really what started my investigation of sexual assault, to want to understand it more. So I started studying sexual assault, consent, rape myths, and more. A few months later, it was around the time, well, I learned that sexual assault is rampant on college campuses. And there is that lawsuit against Brock Turner, the swimmer who raped an unconscious woman behind a dumpster. I was discussing this with my parents, and we were discussing consent, and we disagreed if someone could consent if they were drunk. My dad ended up saying, how are you supposed to know they're not just laying there enjoying it? I was horrified. We were on vacation, we got to our destination, our hotel, and I just left. I went and took a really long walk. I was so horrified, concerned about my mother's well-being, and I was so confused. How could another person be so confused about consent? If someone is unconscious, duh, they do not want it. And I realized that my dad honestly believes that drinking means a woman wants sex. And even if they say otherwise, you don't have to believe them. That's not true, and that's pretty messed up, but that's where he's at. And I think that there are other people in our culture and society that also believe that. So during that process, that just got me reeling about how people can be so confused about what consent is. Because clearly, drinking just is not consent. That's not the same as saying, yes, I would like to have sex with you. Like, the process of putting alcohol in your body is not saying yes. So today, I don't actually want to discuss what consent is, but rather how we teach it. I think we can do a better job at teaching consent far earlier than in high school or college to hopefully prevent the formation of belief in rape myths such as, well, they were drinking or they were dressed like a slut. They were asking for it. In a multicultural education class that I took at BYU, I learned that children's views of other races is pretty set by age 10. Their foundation in respect or racism is essentially solidified by age 10. And after that, we're fighting against a well-trained viewpoint. I don't have data on this, but what if children's views on entitlement are solidified around them as well? Just as it's important to teach against racism during early childhood, we should teach, sorry, I got a little lost. We should teach during early childhood respecting other people's personal boundaries and their right to consent or not. We set the foundation for lots of behaviors, such as don't kill other people or don't steal during early childhood. We might not teach them don't kill, but we do teach them don't hit other people. That hurts them, they feel sad, and we give them reasons why. We don't necessarily teach them to not go steal something from a store, maybe we do, but we do teach them how to share or ask to share. And if someone says, no, you can't share this with me, you cannot use my toy, we don't just let our kids rip something away from another person. We would explain why that's inappropriate. We set the foundations for important behaviors starting very young. And the same should go with consent as the foundation for don't sexually assault someone. Hopefully we could start doing that so that the typical kid doesn't learn what consent means at age 20, like me. My background is in teaching. I'm still a student, finishing up my degree in elementary education. But I've spent quite a bit of time in the classroom, taught half days for a while. Utah has some pretty flexible laws about who can teach. And as a teacher, I'm trained in pedagogy, which is to say research-based teaching methods, practices, and strategies. Winging it is not advised in the classroom. Pedagogy is the tried and true methods. So pedagogy isn't what you teach, but rather how you teach. So today I want to discuss the pedagogy of consent, rather than the content of consent. I want to discuss how we teach consent. So there are a couple of main ways to approach teaching, and good teachers do use all of them. They're inquiry-based and guided instruction models where students have a lot of autonomy, room to explore, and tailor the process to their interests. Inquiry-based and guided instruction methods are backed by research to be very effective, but historically that's not what most of us experienced in school. What most of us received most of the time is explicit instruction with the guided release model. Explicit instruction is when the teacher stands at the board or by PowerPoint, introduces new material, gives examples and models using it, then goes around the classroom helping students use it themselves, and then eventually hands out homework that students can do on their own. So explicit instruction is the first part of the guided release model. In layman's terms, like gradual release model is I do, the teacher, we do, teacher and students, you do, the student independently. So I do, we do, you do. In classrooms, beyond teaching academic content, teachers explicitly teach behavioral expectations and classroom routines. Sincerely, teachers teach everything in elementary school, from the routine for signing up for hot lunch to what the expectations are during reading centers. And by explicit instruction, I mean explicit. It's I do, the teacher walks students through every single step of how to sign up for hot lunch, or it's very explicit. What happens if we don't explicitly teach children reading strategies or classroom routines? Admittedly, some students will probably pick it up on their own. Some students will become proficient readers. Many will figure out with time where to turn in stuff in the classroom, they'll just pick up on what the expectations are of how you treat other people while you're sitting on the rug. But without explicit instruction, a lot of kids will never pick that up. They'll have low achievement in reading. They will never figure out exactly what the classroom routines and behavioral expectations are. So with the lack of explicit instruction, there's just a lot more struggling and a lot more chaos. So we need explicit instruction. There are benefits. So how does this apply to consent? In early childhood, just as we explicitly teach other behavioral expectations to children, explicitly teaching consent can help us avoid a lot of chaos and unnecessary pain as people learn to be functioning adults who respect other people. The stakes are too high in regards to consent to just hope that these tiny developing humans happen to catch on when it comes to consent. Parents and teachers work together to teach the majority of topics, from reading to sharing. Explicit consent instruction should happen both at home and at school to reinforce it. In early childhood, teaching consent in non-sexual social situations would set the foundation for teaching older children or teenagers about consent in sexual or romantic situations. So I'm definitely not saying that we teach young children, before you have sex with someone, you should ask permission. That would not be developmentally appropriate. That would come later with older kids or teenagers. But with younger kids, we teach them consent or permission in developmentally appropriate ways in social contexts, such as teaching them to ask, can I play with that toy you're holding? Can I try some of your food? Can I pet your dog? Can I take a picture of you? Can I take the car out tonight? That would be older kids. So following the gradual release model, we'd explicitly teach children that the word consent also means permission to use or play with something that that belongs to someone else. We'd give examples. I ask before I take a toy from someone. If they say no, I don't take it. I ask permission if I want to take someone's food. If they say no, I don't eat it, even if it looks really tasty. If someone's dog looks really cute and I want to pet it, I ask the owner. If they say yes, I can pet it. If they say no, I don't. We really do have to be really explicit with young children and give examples and non-examples. We need to model it ourselves, asking consent or permission before doing things such as borrowing a student's pencil. I mean, as a teacher, I wouldn't just grab their pencil, I can model it. Asking, hey, can I borrow your pencil? If they say no, that's fine, I'll go grab another pencil. Or you could model it as a parent, asking before you snack someone's fry, and point it out. Say, hey, look, I just asked for permission. Or consent. With young kids, you probably can start with the word permission. That's probably more developmentally appropriate. So then they do need guided practice, because after the explicit instruction comes the guided practice, the we do, together. We coach kids as they ask permission all the time. What do you say? Can I please play with that? Etc. Once they're confident that they understand the need to ask permission or consent, they can have independent practice, but as teachers and adults, we should still monitor their progress and behavior. We should definitely still check in on them and make sure they're asking for permission and consent, even if they're in the independent practice stage, just as a teacher is always checking in if students are completing something independently. In addition to explicit instruction about behavioral expectations, teachers and adults have consequences ready if children ignore the instruction and behave however they want. From the beginning, we should enforce a consequence if children ignore someone not giving them consent. So if they receive a no and do it anyways, we should have a consequence ready. However, I would recommend, along with the consequence, a brief explanation of how they ignored someone who didn't give consent, how that will probably affect the other person, and what they need to do instead next time. As adults, we may know why, we may understand why we got handed a consequence, but children definitely need an explicit explanation about why they received that consequence. So in summary, with younger children, explicitly teaching consent, following the gradual release model in social situations would set the foundation for understanding consent's importance. As kids get older, teaching consent in sexual or romantic situations should follow the same pattern. I'm not an expert, so I don't have an age to recommend, but at some point we should explicitly teach that we should just ask before we hold someone's hand, kiss them, or have sex with them. Other things to explicitly teach would include examples and non-examples of asking for consent, and examples of what an enthusiastic yes would look like or sound like, and examples of what someone not giving consent would look like and sound like. We should also explicitly teach that there are situations where consent is not possible, such as statutory rape if someone is disabled, if someone is drunk, if someone is unconscious, etc. So then I started thinking about how we could model this as adults. And I admit that this gets a little bit trickier. So you might have to just rely a little heavier on explicit instruction. But I think that you could model asking consent, like if you smooch your partner in the kitchen. And I also think that there are ways that there is nonverbal consent, but you would want to point that out every once in a while to kids. Like, look, I leaned in and then my partner leaned in again, so I knew that that was consent. So I think that's a little bit trickier to model, but you can also model, oh look, I was going to do this, but then they said no, so I did not do it. You could model respecting someone's lack of consent as well, and pointing it out. So back to school for a minute. Have you ever had a math teacher who taught a tricky concept on the board, passed out homework for everyone to do, and then sat back at their desk and really didn't help anyone? I felt like I ran into that in high school math classes all the time, and it was very frustrating. So in that situation, the teacher is missing the guided practice. They're giving explicit instruction, they're giving independent practice, but they're not doing the we do together, guided practice. And we can't skip that when we're teaching children and teenagers consent. With teenagers and consent, we do need to check in on them and ask them, how was that movie with your date last night? Did you ask him or her before you held hands? Are you making sure you have consent before anything romantic or sexual? Just check in. They might not tell parents or whatever trusted adult is asking, but at least it's a reminder that consent is important. If we give explicit instruction and then are there during the guided practice, the independent practice will go so much smoother. Developmentally, we really are capable of understanding and obtaining consent during our adolescence and beyond. Don't wait until your kid or niece or nephew or friend is in high school or college to talk about consent for the first time, because odds are they'll already have been in a situation or seen a relationship where a lack of consent has been normalized. Do it before they get to that situation where other people are acting like consent isn't important, so they explicitly know it's wrong, have the vocabulary to name it, and the education to call it out and help end rape culture instead of joining it. We've got to teach them explicitly so that they'll be able to see right through excuses such as, but she was dressed trashy. So, what you're wearing isn't consent. Duh. Let's teach it so it's that obvious. As I wrote this, I was worried that I was writing the biggest sexual assault apologist piece in the history of the world. So I want to emphasize that if someone has sexually assaulted someone else, I'm not advocating that we give them an excuse and say they didn't know enough about consent. That's not at all. Even if someone hasn't received explicit instruction on consent, they know better. It's pretty obvious if you have consent or not. What I am advocating for is teaching consent so frequently and explicitly that when a sexual assault happens, there will be fewer rape defenders and more people clearly understanding that person definitely better. And they won't have the excuse, they just didn't know that you had to have an enthusiastic yes. An abuser can never use the excuse that they just didn't know. I see right through that, and that's not what I'm advocating for. I say that more explicit education on consent can decrease the use of that excuse, that they just didn't know better or thought that laying there surviving was the same as consent. If we talk about consent enough and are explicit enough, we can help people understand it so clearly that there will be no one left who believes rape myths. Let's teach it so clearly that there won't be people left defending rape by saying, how are we supposed to know a woman's not just laying there enjoying it? If we are explicitly teaching consent at home and in schools regularly and like it's completely normal, no one can say that it's fine to have sex with an unconscious person, because consent has become so normalized and an obvious part of relationships in our culture, that if someone didn't obtain consent, we would be horrified, as we should be, rather than buying into lame excuses such as they were dressed in an inappropriate way. So here's to teaching and good pedagogy and normalizing consent in our society through explicit instruction, starting a whole lot earlier, sorry.
All right, any questions?
About 10 minutes of questions.
Yes.
I don't have a question, I just have a comment. I just recently watched on Netflix, they have a show called The Hunting Ground. Have you seen it?
Yes.
And it's really amazing. It's about college students who are getting raped, and then they started to share their experiences and found out that it was rampant on college campuses. So networking online all over the country, they got together and passed some legislation and realized that colleges don't protect women because their money is tied into their sports program, and a lot of these things are related to the athletes. And so they're finding there's commonalities and they're trying to band together. So I thought that was a really eye-opening thing to watch.
Yeah, that was one of the first things I watched when I got home from my mission after the assault, and that was hugely eye-opening. Made me realize it's systemic, and to fight a systemic issue, you really have to start at the bottom. Yeah.
As a BYU student, excuse me, as a BYU student, have you seen things change over the last couple of years as it relates to this topic?
Yes. So yes and no. They have a separate Title IX office now, which is fantastic, and there's a lot more accountability. There's an amnesty clause for if someone was drinking or something and got sexually assaulted, so they can report their assault without being kicked out over the honor code. So that's fantastic. My personal experience with the Title IX office has been less than stellar. So just a couple of weeks ago, I returned to Bolivia to testify against my attacker, and the Title IX office was very unprofessional, did not respond to emails within a prompt time frame. They're supposed to be advocates. Legally they do not have to advocate for me because I was not attacked by someone on campus or a faculty member, but they basically did no advocacy for me and just let my professors choose whatever amount of accommodations they wanted and did not advocate for me. And I asked, where was the advocacy? Come on, fight for me a little bit, and they did not. So I think that we have a lot more to go still, but they have at least the structures in place. We just maybe gotta get the people in place that they're important to. That's my opinion. You and then you.
Would you mind expanding on that point of advocacy in regards of if you do have a Title IX office or a group of people who get together and say, yeah, this is horrible, what services or items should they be providing to victims and to people who need better education and stuff?
Yeah, they are they're bringing people to counseling, which is fantastic because if you've been sexually assaulted, you want that. Title IX office also is there for people accused of sexual assaults, which is also something they need an advocate as well. I think that being there to advocate for you with your professors is essential if you need to miss class for a trial or.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what are your professors have to do? Missing
Yes,
classes?
I was missing classes.
So you need them to back up and say, hey,
Yeah.
she's leaving for a good reason.
Okay. Yes. Thank you for that clarification.
So I have two boys, they're 10 and 13, and I worry constantly about teaching them consent because, that's really important. But I've noticed in family interactions that you get grandma who says, come give me a hug, and then they'll say no, and she'll go and she'll put them anyway. And I'm like, no, this is not, is there a tactful way to talk to grandma and say, we're trying to teach them consent, you are not helping? Or do I just go and say that?
There's probably not a right way to do it. I'm super assertive, so I would probably go tell them exactly that. But I think maybe if you're not as assertive, you could talk to your child and say, hey, look, grandma's not respecting consent. and talk to your child about it. It depends on your mom, probably.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Because I believe very strongly in the your body, your choice, and I'm trying to teach them bodily autonomy, and then grandma just tramples all over that, and it's just like...
I'm with you, I think that's important. But it probably would look different, addressing that for everyone. Yeah.
I didn't really completely understand consent until I was 13. When I was in a situation where someone asked me a question and I had to say no because, and it kind of makes sense as to I think if I had the experience of, permission a little bit more, I think that would have helped me in that situation more. But
So the permission first.
permission first, and I think that, I like how you said that, everyone at the age should give some permission first. If I had that, I would, had it easier time understanding what was going on, and luckily nothing happened.
Absolutely. And it is sometimes luck, sincerely. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had something I wanted to add to the conversation. I love that you talked about training kids when they're young so that when they're older they know how to handle the situations. I think this last week I just read that 1 in 5 girls are assaulted as children before the age of 10, and 1 in 8 boys are too. And so sometimes they need to know it early so that they know when to report when it's not okay when it does happen, because those are really high statistics as it is happening when they're young. And sometimes it goes unreported because they don't know it wasn't okay.
That's really true. Yeah, I agree.
Just kind of adding on to that, and generally to the whole aspect of teaching kids when they're really young. A lot of kids are actually victimized by someone that they know and trust, someone that their parents trust, because they wouldn't have had access to the child if the parents didn't trust them. So it is really important to instill in them when they're very young that it's their body and they get to choose what happens to it, and they get to choose in all of those situations. And it is really tricky with family politics that you don't want to offend grandma and that kind of thing, but it really, it is really powerful for a child to know when they're really young that they get to make the choice. Are they going to help someone? Are they going to, refuse to do that? And that they should have the right to do that, because so many people as children and also as teenagers, young adults, and into adulthood are assaulted when they think that it's an exception. They think that they owe something to this person, that this person's special relationship with them means that they can't say no, or that their no doesn't count because it's somehow invalidated. So just wanted to say that, and also add that my fiance's sister does an amazing job with her kids, and she's been teaching them since they were not even able to talk yet, that they get to choose if they are going to hug someone or not, and that other people get to choose if they will allow them to touch them. And if another child is not having fun, they need to stop and recognize nonverbal no's as well. If they're not having fun, it's your responsibility to stop doing whatever you're doing.
Totally. And that, there's so much content of what consent is. I think that's super important, the content.
It's interesting, the concept of teaching very young children consent. Do we also give them that same opportunity when we offer them food and tell them, you must eat this? Or here's a choice for you?
I think that consent is more about what belongs to you, that no one else has a right to that. Whereas a parent offering food, that is in your child's best interest to eat.
Forcing them to eat it.
Okay, I can see that. Yeah, so much to converse about. I'm definitely not interested there. Yeah.
Forcing, or else.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend forcing. Yeah, there's a lot to converse about, definitely.
So I'd like to add something to the conversation and ask a question. The thing I'd like to add is one of the things that scrolled through my Facebook feed was a young elementary school teacher was teaching consent, and what she do is there'd be the ritual of every morning, and the children there'd be one person kind of doing greetings, and each child had to go by the greeter, and the child could choose whether or not to just wave and say hello to the greeter, or actually high five the greeter, or give a full-on hug. But it was based on both of them saying, yes, I consent to this form. So I thought that was a very appropriate way to teach consent, and also gave degrees of consent.
Yeah.
So that there's a difference between full-on hug and then avoiding a person. There's a middle ground.
That sounds very developmentally appropriate.
The question I have, and I know this is kind of related, you kind of touched upon with the Title IX office. I have a lot of people who tend to say when these discussions come up, why should you inherently believe the victim? I, of course, side on believing the victim over not, but what do you do for people who are at unease for the little percent or so of the advocacy where someone is falsely accused? What do you say to those people?
Wait, so I
So,
don't.
so for those people who are like, oh, the few percent that are falsely accused, they didn't do anything wrong, what would you say to like, oh, you should believe the victim, you should not advocate for the victim? What
That's what I think that both should have an advocate, definitely. Beyond that, I don't have a short, simple answer, because, man, with this whole Kavanaugh thing, I have gotten into it with my family, and I don't have any answers right now. Maybe someone else does, but.
One short answer is somebody comes to you and says, somebody just robbed me. You don't start by disbelieving them. Like, right off the bat, you believe them. They got robbed. And so why is it different with sexual assault, right? I guess because there are times where it is consensual, so I guess maybe there's a line there, but yeah.
Are you
yeah,
sure you
wanting to
didn't
be
want
consensual.
them to rob you?
Yeah.
Insurance purposes?
Yeah, and we're not the law either, right? We're not the law. It's not our job to figure out the guilt and innocence of anybody involved. So if you just believe the victim, what does that hurt?
Yeah.
It turns out false.
Agreed.
I want to throw out there that part of our big Christian lives to know is that if it's not okay to consent, then you can't trust when someone says no, but they really mean it. So I think that really great song comes on around Christmas.
Yes.
It's a really, really perfect example because she's saying no, she really doesn't. Like she's like, what am I going to tell people because they're going to ask if this is not okay in the eyes of society. You know, I really want to stay and agree with you. I'm like, what are they going to say? So we have to have a culture where it's okay to say yes, so that you can also say no.
That's an interesting point. I've not thought of that before.
I was just gonna add a study by the FBI about sexual assault and other crimes showed that false accusations, like false accusations for rape, were as common as false accusations or false statements concerning any other crime. So for the people who said they were robbed, but they weren't actually robbed, they just, I don't know why people lie about stuff. So. Insurance fraud, yes. It's the same percent. So it's not this, so I think dealing with that side of the conversation of what do we do about those who are falsely accused, it's just such a different conversation, and it should be wrapped up in all of that stuff. And I think it's more important, while everybody has an advocate, that we see that our main huge problem is that, you know, only 3% of rapists ever spend a day in jail.
Yeah. Proportionally, it's much bigger problem.
I'll have time for one more question.
One more question. You in the back.
So this thing about believing the victim, I think it started from when you first go to police and they write on the back, don't believe. But it's almost morphing into anyone who says they're raped was raped. And it just seems like the reason was for the first responders to act as if they believe and then go through the investigation and go, this person who's come to you. It's not a blanket statement that they can believe them no matter what you find out, or you don't even have to investigate. Do you know what I mean? So it's start when someone comes and says, this is what happened to me, you act as if you believe them and then do the investigation. But if you don't know anything, you just anyways. So I don't get political, but it's just not a blanket, okay, I believe you no matter what you say. So many women were getting so humiliated at the police agency. When I worked with the police, this one lady came in and she wasn't the least bit attractive and just overweight. And she heard one of the officers say, why would you rape her? Do you know what I mean? Because they were stupid. They didn't even know that rape is power, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's for these people, you don't discount. You believe them like if someone got robbed or her house burnt down, and then you go find out. But it's not a blanket free pass.
There's so much to discuss with that.
And the other thing
Yes.
is, 1 out of 6 men get molested. And we have a huge problem where nobody's safe. And it's just not women. Women are like 1 in 4, men are 1 in 6. We have a lot of victims and a lot of people who, how do we find them and stop them?
Thank you, yeah.